My son sold my late husband's car on a Tuesday. He waited until Sunday dinner to tell me. Ethan had invited me to his house in Dublin, Ohio, along with his wife Vanessa, her parents, and 2 members of our extended family. By the time dessert arrived, everyone at the table seemed to know what was coming except me. Ethan reached into his jacket and slid a folded check across the polished dining table. $18,500, he said. That's your share. I looked at the number before I looked at him. My share of what? Vanessa set down her wineglass with a soft little smile, the kind people use when they believe they are being patient with someone difficult. The Mustang, Maggie. For a moment, I could hear nothing but the hum of the refrigerator. The 1969 Ford Mustang convertible had been Robert's anniversary gift to me. He had restored it himself during the first profitable year of Whitmore Industrial Supply. The leather still carried the faint smell of the conditioner he used every spring. After he died, it was one of the few places where I could sit and remember him without anyone telling me to move on. You sold my car? I asked. Ethan leaned back in his chair. It was registered under Whitmore Holdings, not under your personal name. Insurance was costing the company money, and we needed the warehouse space. I had the authority. He said it calmly, almost proudly. Then Vanessa added, You can't keep every old thing just because it reminds you of Robert. At some point, the family has to start making rational decisions. I folded the check once and placed it in my purse. Ethan mistook my silence for surrender. That was when he told me he had also canceled my parking space at the company and arranged an appointment for me to tour a senior living community. According to him, my house was too large, the business was too complicated, and it was time for the next generation to take control. Everyone watched me, waiting for tears or anger. Instead, I asked, Do you still have the bill of sale? He laughed. Of course. Good. Bring it to Monday's board meeting. My phone vibrated inside my purse. I glanced at the screen beneath the table. It was a message from Elena Ruiz, my attorney. I looked across the table at my son, who believed he had just sold the last thing I had left of his father. What Ethan didn't know was that he owned only 2% of the company he called his. And by the end of the week, I intended to sell the rest. Whitmore Industrial Supply began in a rented warehouse that leaked every time it rained. Robert and I were 30 years old, newly married, and carrying more confidence than money. He had spent 6 years working sales for a regional equipment distributor before deciding he could build something better. I had been an assistant bookkeeper at a construction company, which meant I understood exactly how quickly a dream could collapse when the numbers stopped cooperating. Robert found the customers. I made sure we survived long enough to keep them. During our first year, I handled invoices at the kitchen table after Ethan went to sleep. I learned payroll taxes from library books, negotiated payment extensions with suppliers, and called customers who were 30 days late without sounding desperate. When the company needed a larger credit line, I used the equity in our first home as collateral. Robert hated that decision. We could lose the house, he told me. We could lose the company without it, I replied. He signed because he trusted me. That was the part of our marriage people rarely saw. Robert had the warm handshake and the easy laugh. He remembered every customer's children and could turn a 5-minute conversation into a 20-year business relationship. I stayed behind the scenes where the mistakes were quieter and more expensive. By the time Ethan entered middle school, Whitmore Industrial Supply had 26 employees and contracts across central Ohio. By the time he graduated from college, we had expanded into 3 states. At company dinners, people praised Robert for building an empire. He would always raise his glass toward me and say, Maggie built the floor I stand on. I never needed more than that. When Robert died of a heart attack at 58, I took over the company before I had even figured out how to sleep alone. I signed payroll checks the morning after his funeral because 114 employees still had mortgages, medical bills, and children in college. For 4 years, I ran everything. Then my mother's health declined and my own knee began to fail. Ethan had been working in operations since finishing his MBA, and he was good at it. He introduced an online ordering system, reorganized the warehouse, and negotiated better freight rates. Revenue increased. Deliveries became faster. Younger employees liked him. I was proud of him, maybe too proud. I began stepping back one responsibility at a time. First, I let Ethan handle vendor negotiations, then staffing decisions, then budget meetings. Every time someone asked about succession, I smiled and said, "One day, it will all be his." I meant that he would earn the responsibility. Ethan heard that the company already belonged to him. The changes came slowly enough that I could pretend they were harmless. My weekly reports became monthly reports. Then they stopped arriving unless I requested them. My assistant retired, and Ethan replaced her with someone who referred to me as the founder's widow, though my name was still on every major ownership document. He removed Robert's old desk from the executive office because he said it made the room look outdated. He changed the company website so his own photograph appeared under the words. Mine was moved to a history page most customers would never open. Whenever I questioned him, he had a reasonable explanation. The company needed a modern image. The staff needed one clear leader. I needed to rest. That last one was especially effective because it sounded like love. After Sunday dinner, I drove home in the small sedan I had been borrowing since the Mustang disappeared. The house was dark when I arrived. Robert's work boots were still on the shelf in the garage, exactly where I had left them 6 years earlier. I sat in the kitchen with Ethan's check beside me and opened my laptop. The company's financial dashboard rejected my password twice before letting me in. Several folders had been restricted. That had never happened before. At 10:43 p.m., my phone rang. The caller was Frank Dorsey, owner of one of our oldest supply partners. "Maggie," he said carefully, "I'm sorry to call this late, but I didn't know who else to contact." "What happened?" There was a pause. "Whitmore owes us nearly $200,000. We're 60 days past due." I stared at the screen in front of me. According to the monthly summary Ethan had sent, cash flow was strong. That can't be right. I have the invoices in front of me. Then Frank lowered his voice. "I assumed Ethan told you the bank was reviewing your credit line." My hand tightened around the phone. "What review?" Another silence. "The kind that happens before they freeze it." I looked at the check from the Mustang and finally understood. My son hadn't sold the car because the company needed parking space. He had sold it because he needed cash. I arrived at Whitmore Industrial Supply at 7 the next morning, 45 minutes before Ethan usually came in. The security guard hesitated when he saw me. "Mrs. Whitmore," he said, standing too quickly. "I didn't know you were coming." "I own the building, Carl. I don't believe I need an appointment." His face reddened. He stepped aside. The warehouse still smelled the same: cardboard, machine oil, cold concrete, but almost everything else felt unfamiliar. The framed photograph of Robert and me cutting the ribbon on our first loading dock was gone from the lobby. In its place hung a large black and white portrait of Ethan with the words beneath it. I stood there longer than I should have. Then I kept walking. Robert's old office had been stripped of everything that made it his. The oak desk was gone. So was the brass lamp I had given him on our 10th anniversary. The walls were painted charcoal gray, and a glass table stood in the center of the room beneath a television screen displaying quarterly sales figures. Ethan's name was etched into a metal plate by the door. Inside, a woman I did not recognize was placing folders on the conference table. "I'm looking for the weekly cash reports," I said. She glanced at me, then at the door. "I'm sorry, those are restricted." "Restricted from whom?" "Executive leadership." I almost laughed. "My name is Margaret Whitmore." The color drained from her face. Before she could answer, Ethan entered carrying 2 cups of coffee. He stopped when he saw me. "Mom, what are you doing here?" "Reviewing the company's accounts." His expression tightened for half a second before the concern appeared. "You should have called. I would have brought everything to the house." "I'm already here." He set the coffee down and closed the office door. "You're upset about the car. I'm concerned about the credit line." That silenced him. Only briefly. Ethan sighed and loosened his tie as though I had created an inconvenience he had expected but hoped to avoid. "We had a temporary liquidity issue. Nothing serious. Frank Dorsey says we owe him nearly $200,000. We're restructuring payment schedules." "Why didn't you tell me?" "Because every time the company makes an aggressive move, you panic. I studied him. He did not sound guilty. He sounded offended that I had discovered something he considered none of my business. I asked for the bank records, I said, and I'll provide a summary. I want the records. Ethan opened a drawer and removed a blue folder. I was going to discuss this with you later in the week. Inside was a legal document marked. He spoke carefully, using the calm tone Robert once used with nervous clients. This would allow me to manage routine financial matters for you. Banking, property, tax filings, anything involving the company. It would make things easier. I turned the pages slowly. The authority was not limited to routine matters. It allowed Ethan to borrow against my assets, manage my ownership interests, execute real estate transactions, and act on my behalf if I became unavailable or unable to participate. You want control of my shares. I want to protect the business. You also want authority over my house. That's standard language. No, it isn't. His jaw shifted. Mom, you've missed meetings. You've forgotten appointments. Last month, you sent the same email twice. I'm 62, Ethan, not incompetent. I didn't say you were. You prepared documents that would let you act as though I were. For the first time, the patience disappeared from his face. You said this company would be mine. One day. When? I closed the folder. When I believed you were ready. The words hurt him. I saw it immediately. Beneath the entitlement was something more complicated, a son who had spent his adult life waiting for his father's approval, then mine, and had decided waiting itself was an insult. He stepped closer. I have spent 6 years carrying this place while you stayed home protecting memories. I increased revenue. I modernized operations. I built the company Robert should have built. The sentence hung between us. He regretted it, but not enough to take it back. I placed the power of attorney on his desk. I'm not signing this. Ethan's face became strangely calm. Then the board may need to consider whether your involvement is creating risk. It was not a threat spoken in anger. That made it worse. I left without another word. At home that evening, I opened my email and found a message forwarded by mistake from Ethan's new assistant. It had originally been sent to Vanessa. The subject line read, "The attached document contained a 6-step plan. Remove me from the board. Use my absence from recent meetings as evidence of diminished capacity. Transfer voting authority to Ethan. Mortgage the warehouse, sell my house, and move me into a senior community." At the bottom, beneath a section titled, Ethan had written one final note. I did not call Ethan after reading the email. That was the first decision I made entirely for myself. For years, whenever something felt wrong, I had reached for the phone. I explained, questioned, softened, or gave him another chance to correct what he had done before anyone else noticed. I had mistaken protection for love so many times that I no longer knew where one ended and the other began. This time, I printed the email. Then I called Elena Ruiz. Elena had been our corporate attorney for 19 years. She knew the company's history, the trust documents, the property structure, and every succession plan Robert and I had ever discussed. More importantly, she had never been impressed by Ethan's title. I met her the next morning in a private conference room downtown. She read the transition plan twice without speaking. "Did you sign anything recently?" she asked. "No." "Any amendments to the trust? Voting proxies? Banking authorizations?" "No." "Good." That one word told me how close I had come to losing everything. Elena brought in Denise Park, a forensic accountant who had spent most of her career untangling family-owned businesses where personal resentment had been disguised as corporate strategy. Denise was compact, unsmiling, and direct. "I need tax returns, bank statements, payroll records, vendor contracts, credit agreements, and payments to any entity connected to your son or daughter-in-law," she said. "You think Vanessa is involved?" I think people rarely build plans this organized alone. Because I still held controlling voting rights, Elena was able to authorize an internal review without notifying Ethan immediately. Denise began by comparing the monthly summaries Ethan had given me with the actual bank activity. The differences appeared within 48 hours. Sales were strong. The company was not failing. But Ethan had expanded faster than our cash could support. He had purchased excess inventory, opened a distribution route in Kentucky before securing enough customers, and delayed payments to long-term suppliers in order to make quarterly revenue appear healthier. That explained the credit line review. It did not explain the missing money. Denise found a consulting company called EV Growth Partners. Over 18 months, Whitmore Industrial Supply had paid it $183,400. The registered owner was Vanessa Whitmore. The invoices described brand modernization, executive positioning, and market research. Some were dated after the payments had already been made. Others listed work that our in-house marketing team had actually completed. Then Denise traced the spending. A $24,000 payment had covered kitchen renovations at Ethan and Vanessa's lake house. Another funded furniture deliveries. 3 industry research trips matched vacations Vanessa had posted online from Napa, Miami, and Scottsdale. A company reimbursement had paid the deposit on her new SUV. I stared at the spreadsheet until the numbers blurred. "Elena," I said, "is this theft? It may be breach of fiduciary duty, self-dealing, false business expense reporting, or more. We need the complete records before using criminal language." I appreciated her caution, even though part of me wanted a simpler word. Betrayal would have worked. Denise uncovered the Mustang transaction next. Ethan had sold the car to Buckeye Classic Motors for $18,500. The dealership's owner was Vanessa's older brother, Scott. 2 days later, the car appeared on the dealership website listed for $49,900. There had been no independent appraisal, no competing offer, and no disclosure to the board. "He didn't just sell it," Denise said. "He transferred value to his wife's family." That hurt more than the price. The car had not been sacrificed to save the company. It had been used to enrich people who had spent years treating me like a sentimental obstacle. Elena then asked her assistant to bring in a thick binder labeled. Ethan had repeatedly referred to the company as his inheritance. I had allowed him to. I had even encouraged it. But the documents told a different story. After Robert died, I retained 68% of the voting control through the trust. An employee ownership plan held a substantial portion of the remaining shares. Ethan owned only 2% outright. "What about the 10% Robert promised him?" I asked. Elena opened a marked section. "It was never transferred. It is an option, triggered only if Ethan is formally appointed CEO and remains in good standing." She tapped the next paragraph. "The option is canceled if he is terminated for fraud, undisclosed related party transactions, or breach of fiduciary duty." I sat back. For 6 years, Ethan had behaved as though he already owned the company. Legally, he barely owned the conference room chair he sat in. There was one more protection I had nearly forgotten. The warehouse and the land beneath it did not belong to Whitmore Industrial Supply at all. Robert and I had placed them in a separate limited liability company after a lawsuit threatened the business years earlier. That LLC was mine alone. Ethan could not mortgage the building without my signature. Denise closed her laptop. "The company is still valuable," she said, "but under current management, that value is being drained." Elena looked at me carefully. "Midstate Supply Group made an acquisition offer 2 years ago. You rejected it because you wanted Ethan to have a future here." I remembered that conversation. I had told Robert's empty chair afterward that I was protecting our son. "What would happen to the employees?" I asked. "If we negotiate correctly, they stay," Elena said. "The business survives. The leadership changes." I looked at the audit report, the trust agreement, and the photograph of my Mustang on the dealer's website. For the first time, I understood that taking control back did not mean returning to Ethan's office and demanding my old chair. Elena seemed to read the thought on my face. "You don't have to fight him for his seat, Maggie," she said. "You can sell the whole table." Ethan scheduled what he called a succession strategy meeting for Friday afternoon. He invited the full board, our bank representative, 3 senior managers, Vanessa and me. The email described the meeting as an opportunity to establish stable leadership before the next quarter. Attached to it was a draft press release. My name appeared only once, in a paragraph thanking me for supporting the company's transition into modern leadership. I forwarded the email to Elena. Her reply came less than a minute later. By then, Midstate Supply Group had completed its preliminary review. They were interested, but I had made my conditions clear. No mass layoffs, no cancellation of employee health insurance, no disruption to the pension contributions Robert and I had established. Every supplier Ethan had delayed would be paid. The warehouse would remain open for at least 3 years. Midstate could replace executive management, but the people on the loading docks and in the accounting offices would not lose their jobs because my son had confused ambition with ownership. The meeting began at 2 o'clock in the conference room Ethan had built inside Robert's old office. He stood at the head of the glass table beneath a screen displaying the company logo. Vanessa sat beside him in a cream suit, her phone face down in front of her. She had dressed for a photograph. I took the seat closest to the door. Ethan began with charts. He spoke about revenue growth, logistics modernization, regional expansion, and the need for faster executive decisions. He described our cash problems as temporary pressure caused by legacy limitations, a phrase carefully designed to blame me without using my name. Then he changed the slide. A photograph of me appeared on the screen beside the words. I almost admired the cruelty of the phrasing. Ethan looked around the table. My mother's contribution to this company is beyond question, but no organization can move forward when authority remains divided between active leadership and emotional attachment to the past. Thomas Bell, our longest-serving board member, lowered his eyes to the papers in front of him. Ethan continued. He said I had missed meetings. He mentioned that I no longer came into the office regularly. He referred to increasing confusion regarding operational details and suggested that the board had a duty to reduce risk. Vanessa leaned forward. Maggie deserves peace, she said. She shouldn't have to carry responsibilities that are clearly overwhelming her. The softness in her voice made the insult sharper. Ethan placed 3 documents in front of me. The first was my resignation from the board. The second authorized Whitmore Industrial Supply to use the warehouse as collateral. The third transferred my voting authority to Ethan for an indefinite transition period. He'd even marked the signature lines with yellow tabs. I know this is difficult, he said, but it protects everyone. Everyone? I asked. The employees, the company, you. I looked at the bank representative. Is the bank requiring my resignation? The man shifted in his chair. We are requiring a credible plan to address liquidity concerns. That wasn't my question. No, he admitted. The bank has not requested your resignation. Ethan's face hardened. This is not the time for technical arguments. I turned to him. When were you planning to tell the board about EV Growth Partners? Vanessa's hand moved toward her phone. Ethan did not blink. That firm provided legitimate consulting services. Then I assume you have no objection to an independent review. The company cannot afford distractions. Thomas finally looked up. An undisclosed payment to a business owned by your wife is not a distraction, Ethan. The room went still. For the first time, uncertainty entered my son's expression. He had believed Thomas supported him. He had believed the board's silence meant loyalty. It had only meant patience. Ethan recovered quickly. This meeting is about succession. If there are accounting questions, we can address them separately. He turned to me again. Sign the documents, Mom. We can handle the rest privately. There it was. Not a request, not concern, a command delivered in front of witnesses so that refusing would make me appear unstable and selfish. I closed the folder. My attorney needs 3 business days to review everything. Vanessa exhaled sharply. Ethan smiled, convinced delay meant fear. Fine, he said, but the company cannot wait forever. Neither could I. That evening, Midstate accepted my final terms in writing. They would retain the employees, honor the benefits, settle overdue vendor accounts, and lease the warehouse at market value. Ethan would not be offered a position in the new management structure. At 9:30, my son called. He spoke as though the afternoon had never happened. Mom, I'm willing to guarantee you a monthly allowance after the transition. You'll never have to worry about money. An allowance. From a company I still controlled. Do you truly believe Whitmore belongs to you? I asked. I've run it for 6 years. That wasn't the question. His voice sharpened. Without me, you wouldn't have a company left. I looked at Midstate's signed letter of intent on my kitchen table. By next Friday, I said, neither will you. The special board meeting took place the following Friday at Elena Ruiz's office downtown. Ethan arrived 10 minutes early wearing the navy suit Robert had once bought him for his first major client presentation. Vanessa came beside him, carrying a leather folder and wearing the same cream coat she had worn during the succession meeting. She looked prepared for photographs. I wondered whether she had already written the announcement. The conference table was covered with documents, but none of them were the resignation papers Ethan expected me to sign. At each seat, Elena had placed a copy of Denise Park's forensic audit, the Whitmore family trust, the company bylaws, the employment agreement governing Ethan's stock options, and Mid-State Supply Group's signed purchase agreement. Ethan stopped at the doorway. "What is this?" "A board meeting," Elena said. "Please sit down." Thomas Bell and the other directors were already there. So was the representative from the bank. Two Mid-State executives joined through a secure video call. Ethan looked at me. "You brought in a buyer?" "I brought in options. You had no authority to negotiate a sale without management approval." Elena opened the company bylaws. "Mrs. Whitmore holds 68% of the voting control. She had full authority to solicit an offer." The confidence left Ethan's face for the first time. Denise began with the accounts payable problem. She explained that Whitmore Industrial Supply had strong sales and valuable customer contracts. The company's immediate crisis had not been caused by declining demand. It had been caused by rapid expansion, concealed liabilities, and money diverted through undisclosed related party transactions. A spreadsheet appeared on the wall screen. EV Growth Partners had received $183,400 from the company over 18 months. Vanessa leaned forward. Those were legitimate consulting fees. Denise did not react. "Then you should be able to explain why several invoices were created after the payments cleared." Vanessa's mouth tightened. "The work was done under a general service agreement. There is no signed service agreement in the corporate records." Ethan turned toward the board. "This is administrative sloppiness, not misconduct." Denise changed the screen. The next slide showed the payments linked to the renovation contractor at Ethan's lake house, the furniture company, Vanessa's SUV deposit, and the travel bookings. Ethan's attorney, who had remained silent until then, leaned toward him and whispered something. Ethan pushed his chair back. "We can reimburse disputed expenses. There is no reason to destroy the company over accounting classifications." "I'm not destroying the company," I said. "I'm stopping you from using it as a family checking account." He stared at me as though I had struck him. Denise moved to the Mustang. The car had been sold to Vanessa's brother for $18,500 without an appraisal or board disclosure. 48 hours later, it had been listed for $49,900. The difference was not simply sentimental. It was measurable. Thomas removed his glasses. "You sold a company asset below market value to your wife's family?" "It was an old car occupying warehouse space," Ethan said. "It was an undisclosed related party transaction," Elena replied, "and it violated the asset disposal limits in your operating authority." Ethan looked around the table, searching for someone who still believed his version. No one spoke. Elena then opened his employment agreement. Ethan had spent years telling people he owned 12% of Whitmore Industrial Supply. In reality, he owned 2%. The remaining 10% was an option contingent upon his formal appointment as CEO and continued good standing. The option could be canceled if he was terminated for fraud, self-dealing, or breach of fiduciary duty. "That clause was never meant to apply to me," Ethan said. "It applies precisely to you," Elena answered. Thomas called for a vote. The board terminated Ethan's employment for cause. The decision was unanimous. The 10% option disappeared before he had ever legally owned it. Vanessa turned to him. "You said the shares had already transferred." Ethan did not answer. That was the moment I understood that he had lied to her too. Perhaps he had needed her to believe he was richer and more powerful than he really was. Perhaps their entire marriage had been built on the future he expected me to surrender. I used my voting control to approve the sale to Mid-State. The agreement guaranteed continued employment for the existing staff, preserved health benefits, funded overdue supplier payments, and kept the Columbus warehouse open. Mid-State would lease the property from my separate LLC, which meant the building Ethan planned to mortgage had never been available to him. His 2% ownership remained valid. He would receive the lawful value of those shares when the sale closed. I did not take what was legally his. I simply stopped giving him what he had tried to steal. Mid-State's attorney then presented a formal demand for repayment from EV Growth Partners. If Ethan and Vanessa refused to settle, the company would pursue civil claims and refer any false tax reporting to the appropriate authorities. Vanessa went pale. Ethan looked at me with an expression I had never seen before. It was not anger alone. It was disbelief that the woman he had spent years dismissing had understood every document he had ignored. "You sold my future," he said, "because of a car." "No," I replied. "The car only made me look at the books. You promised this company would be mine. I promised you an opportunity. You treated it like a deed." He stood so quickly that his chair struck the wall. "You can't do this to your own son." I kept my voice level. "You tried to take my home, my building, and my vote while telling everyone it was for my protection." His face reddened, but he had no answer. The sale documents were signed at 4:17 that afternoon. By 5, the employees had received an email confirming that their jobs and benefits were safe. The company survived. My son's title did not. As Ethan walked out, he turned back once. Was winning worth losing me? I looked at the papers he had expected me to sign away. "I lost you when you decided my trust was something you could liquidate." The sale closed 11 days later. Midstate transferred the purchase money into the family trust, paid the overdue suppliers, and sent a transition team to Columbus. No one on the warehouse floor lost a job. The health plan remained in place, and the retirement contributions Robert and I had promised years earlier continued without interruption. That mattered more to me than the final number on the closing statement. For weeks, I had been afraid that protecting myself would punish people who had done nothing wrong. But the business did not collapse when Ethan left. Orders still arrived. Trucks still backed into the loading bays. Employees still complained about the coffee in the break room. Whitmore Industrial Supply had never been one man. Not Robert, not Ethan, not even me. It had survived because hundreds of people had carried it, one ordinary workday at a time. Midstate signed a 3-year lease for the warehouse at market value, with an option to purchase later. The property remained inside my LLC, beyond the reach of Ethan's debts, and beyond the authority of anyone who might someday tell me that I was too old to understand what I owned. I paid off the remaining mortgage on my house. Then I opened new accounts at a bank Ethan had never used. Elena helped me remove every old authorization connected to him. I changed the beneficiary structure on the trust, giving my grandchildren protected education funds that neither parent could borrow against, pledge as collateral, or withdraw for personal expenses. The money would be there for tuition, books, and housing, not lake houses, not luxury SUVs, not consulting trips to Napa. Ethan and Vanessa settled with Midstate rather than face a civil lawsuit. They refinanced their primary home, sold the lake property, and returned most of the disputed money. Vanessa's brother canceled the Mustang transaction after Elena sent him notice that the sale could be challenged as an undisclosed related party deal. The car came back to the warehouse on a gray Thursday morning. I stood beside it for nearly an hour. The red paint still shone. Robert's old keychain was still tucked inside the glove compartment. When I sat behind the wheel, I could almost hear him laughing beside me, telling me I was shifting too early. For 6 years, I had treated that car like proof that our marriage had happened and that the life we built had mattered. But Robert was not in the leather seats. He was in the pension fund we had created for employees. He was in the careful language of the trust. He was in every lesson I had finally remembered about protecting what people depended on. So I sold the Mustang. This time I chose the buyer. I ordered an independent appraisal, accepted a fair offer from a retired mechanic in Cincinnati, and signed the title myself. I did not cry when he drove it away. I bought a silver crossover with heated seats, a backup camera, and enough room for groceries. It had no history attached to it. That felt strangely luxurious. Ethan called me 37 times during the first month after the sale. The early messages were angry. He accused me of humiliating him. He demanded that I ask Midstate to reconsider. He insisted his 2% payout had been undervalued, though 3 independent appraisals said otherwise. Then his messages became desperate. His applications for executive positions were going nowhere. References from former board members were cautious. His title had once opened doors, but without the Whitmore name attached to a company, employers began asking what he had actually accomplished and why he had left. The first time he called to apologize, he spent 7 minutes explaining what I had done wrong. I did not return the call. Months later, a letter arrived in his handwriting. He admitted that I had made him believe the company would eventually be his. He said he had built his entire adult identity around that expectation. When Robert died, Ethan had become terrified that I would sell the business before he could prove himself. None of that excused what he had done. But some of it was true. I had protected him from consequences for too long. I had praised his successes and quietly repaired his mistakes. I had spoken of inheritance as though love and ownership were the same thing. I agreed to meet him at a therapist's office. My conditions were simple: no discussion of money, no requests for favors, and no contact with my attorneys or financial advisors without my written permission. Ethan accepted. I did not forgive him that day. Forgiveness was not a door I had to open because he finally knocked politely. But I listened. And when the session ended, I went home alone without feeling guilty about it. The next morning, I had a locksmith replace every exterior lock on the house. After he left, I placed the new keys on a brass hook beside the kitchen door. My phone lit up with Ethan's name. I watched it ring once, then turned it face down and carried my coffee to the porch. The sun was rising over a life that belonged to me again. This time I kept the keys.